It's menopause week, and we have upcoming on Friday Menopause Day. So I wanted to bring to you just a little series of some of worries of menopause. You know, I'm 53 years old. I am a family physician. I am a nutritionist, but I've gone through the changes just like so many of you are going through right now. So I asked some of my patients to submit questions as to what some of their worries of menopause are. So let me go through a few over this next couple of days. So I'll begin with first weight management. So, what do we know? So, yes, weight begins to change as you go through menopause. And why is that? Many women, as estrogen begins to drop, develop what's called insulin sensitivity. So, what does this mean? That your body doesn't process sugar as well. So, blood sugar can rise. It actually can get to the point where you can develop pre-diabetes. And so, when your sugar rises, you have more of this fat storage hormone called insulin, and that's why we begin to have fat storage in our bodies. And one of the things that you might notice is the redistribution of weight, and it goes from the hips to the belly. And the reason for that, again, is the way that our body processes estrogen and these estrogen receptors that we have. So they change as we go through menopause, which is why we start to get thick around the middle. So, what do we know? What can we do about this? So, number one is paying attention to what you eat. We know that highly processed and refined foods can make a big difference during this time. You know, when you were younger, maybe you could eat anything, but as you get into your 40s, you might start to see that, wow, I can't really eat those high carb foods the way that I could before. So, pay attention to having a whole foods based diet. And do we know if hormone therapy can make a difference? Well, there has been research that shows that menopausal hormone therapy with estrogen and progesterone can actually modify insulin resistance. So, does this modify your weight? We don't have that number, but we know that it changes the way that your body responds to glucose in your system. So, that's one of the things for you to begin to consider. And weight management, there's so many other things, of course, that can be done. We also know that our muscle mass changes as we go through menopause because estrogen really impacts our muscle mass. So strength-based training is really important as you go through, and that can influence your weight management as well during this time. So irritability, does this happen? Well, many times even those that are not going through menopause, when you've been maybe younger, or maybe you're now in your 20s or 30s, or maybe you're a man that's listening and you've often wondered, why does my wife get hormonal or my partner get hormonal? And this is because estrogen and progesterone fluctuate during the month. In particular, the 7 days just before we go into having our period. Progesterone is our feel-good hormone. Typically, it's quite high during that time, but there's a lot of reasons that can cause it to change. And when progesterone drops and our estrogen is changing, then our mood can become quite irritable as well. But for some women, those changes of PMS, they go on into the 40s and right into the 50s, and they feel like they're PMS all of the time. So many of my patients say, like, I've never been cranky with my kids. Like, I'm slamming doors, I'm throwing things. This is just not me. And so this irritability can come as well from these menopausal changes. So what can you do? Number one is be aware of it and ask yourself, is this how I always was, or could there be something else going on? So awareness is the key. Brain fog. We need to bring this one up because it's another common symptom, and also the one that I had just when I started when I was 41 and going through perimenopause. And unless you've had brain fog, you can't quite describe it. It's a feeling like you're spaced out, that you're not really in your skin. And the things that you do, sometimes it can even be to the point that nothing brings you pleasure, nothing brings you joy. It's like you're going through the motions in life. And this is not a great way to be. And when I was 41, things got better when I started changing my nutrition, for sure, when I really went to a whole foods-based food plan. But for many women, this brain fog can continue. And a lot of it does have to do with the role of estrogen and how it impacts the brain. So we know now with Dr. Lisa Mosconi's work, she's a neuroscientist, and in June of this year, she released a paper where she was able to identify, her team was able to identify estrogen receptors in the brain. So we know that there's real changes that are happening in the brain as a woman goes through the menopausal transition. So in the early 40s or in the early part of this menopausal change, we see changes with sleep patterns, and of course we see changes with hot flashes. And then later on, we're seeing this anxiety, cognition, this brain fog, irritability, depression, and also the ability to have trouble with your memory and finding your words later on in life. So, again, these changes are not inevitable. They don't happen to every single woman, but if they are happening to you, know that there is something that you can do about it. There are many ways that you can help to overcome this issue of brain fog during this transition time. Next question, hormone levels imbalance. Well, this is what it's about, right? So what happens when we're young? We have our two major hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So during the month, estrogen goes through very nice, like very gentle, two different peaks of fluctuations. And this is based on when we release an egg. And then progesterone, which is secreted by the corpus luteum, which happens after we release an egg on day 14, progesterone begins to rise. So in a normal cycle, we have these lovely patterns and things are matched really well. But then after our 40s, or maybe sometimes even earlier, in particular for women that have things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, we're starting to see these hormonal imbalances. So what does it mean? That our estrogen is not really in balance with regards to our progesterone. And then we can see a lot of things happening. So for women, when we think that maybe estrogen is out of balance, we think about hot flashes and night sweats. When we think that progesterone may be out of balance, we think maybe that our mood is changing. But it is a role or a time when the hormones are definitely changing. How do we get them back in order? There's many ways to do that. So we have ways, of course, all the lifestyle measures. But for example, for progesterone, so for when women are really in their early 40s, for the most part, they're in the early phases of perimenopause. And we know that there's a natural supplement called Vitext or chasteberry. It's been proven to naturally boost progesterone. So with women in the very early part of hormonal changes, or maybe if they're just having a lot of PMS symptoms, that this supplement can be actually good to help to regulate their mood during those times. And then, of course, as things go further along, then this is when sometimes we begin having a conversation about hormonal replacement therapy, but also even thinking about our nutrient deficiencies, because hormones are chemical messengers. So every chemical messenger that goes in our body, it needs fundamental building blocks. So for example, if your vitamin D is not adequate, if your vitamin B12 is not adequate, then you may not produce your hormones effectively to get the maximal response. So there's many things that could lead to those hormonal issues, which is why a really holistic approach to hormone care is really important. One of the things that I do in my clinic is I don't just look at hormones, because how can we take the body in isolation? So we have to look at what else is going on, those nutrient deficiencies. We have to look at cortisol, our stress-based hormone. We have to look at our gut, because we also know that the gut, when it's out of balance, the microbiome can contribute to our hormones being out of balance because of this gut-brain connection that's going on. So, further fears. Okay, the loss of brain capacity, speed, and retention. So many women come in to me and they're really concerned about this, in particular, those that have roles in business. I've had patients come in to say me that I'm in a board meeting and I'm just kind of surrounded by a group of men, and then the hot flashes come on and I can feel myself breaking out in a sweat. But some of them say, I lose my word finding capacity. And so these changes can happen. So what's going on during menopause transition? It actually, Dr. Mosconi, the neuroscientist, describes this as a neuroendocrine change. So what does this mean? So neuro refers to our brain and endocrine refers to our hormones. So our brain is literally getting rewired as we go through the menopause transition. Now, some of you might be thinking, I don't want my brain to get rewired. This is really scary. But what's really important to know is that on the other side of this is that you're going to come out and you're going to be happier than ever before. And so, what we really just need to work on are things that we can do to get you through this menopause transition so that you feel your best during this time. So, I hope these has been helpful tips. Stay tuned for the next 2 coming days as we get ready during this week of menopause.